The rich stepmother made shocking accusations at her father's party, but when she found his secret message, the truth destroyed a powerful family. Heartbreaking story. The ballroom of the Anderson mansion sparkled under massive crystal chandeliers. Boston's high society circulated among champagne flutes and whispered conversations, celebrating William Anderson's 70th birthday, the pharmaceutical industry magnate. Sarah Anderson rushed through the hospital corridors, still in her nurse's uniform. "Go, honey," her supervisor insisted. "Your father only turned 70 once." After hurriedly changing in the locker room, Sarah glanced at her reflection. Her simple blue dress contrasted with the signs of exhaustion on her face after a double shift. Entering the ballroom, she felt the critical stares of the guests. Catherine, her stepmother, watched her with a cold smile from across the room. Rebecca, her half-sister, looked away, pretending not to notice her. "Sarah, my daughter." William Anderson's face lit up with a genuine smile. For a moment, Sarah saw the father of her childhood, before Catherine, before the changes. A quick flashback transported her to years ago. William visiting her at the hospital during her first year as a nurse, proud of her calling to care for others. "Sorry I'm late, Dad. We had an emergency and—" "Of course you did," Catherine interrupted, her voice sharp as ice. "There's always an emergency when you work." "Where exactly?" "Oh yes, in the public ward of the hospital." Sarah took a deep breath, ignoring the provocation. It was her father's birthday. She raised her glass for a toast. "Dad, I want to thank—" "No," Catherine cut in again. "I won't let you use this occasion to manipulate your father again." Her face contorted with anger as she continued. "Everyone here needs to know the truth about William Anderson's dedicated daughter." The ballroom plunged into silence. Sarah felt her heart racing. "This woman," Catherine pointed accusingly, "stole money from the company years ago. And now she has the audacity to show up here, pretending to care about her father." "That's a lie," Sarah protested, but her voice trembled. "And Anderson cleaning up after sick people? How degrading." Catherine laughed with contempt. "Look at her. She doesn't even know how to dress properly for an occasion like this." The guests began to murmur. Sarah saw horror and pity in their looks. Rebecca remained motionless, her face pale. Suddenly, William staggered, clutching his chest. Sarah rushed to help him, her nurse's instincts taking over. "Get away from him," Catherine screamed. "Don't you dare touch him with those hands that care for indigents." As paramedics were called, William grabbed Sarah's hand, whispering something she couldn't understand. His eyes, however, conveyed a message that would haunt her for a long time. Sarah watched helplessly as her father was rushed away. Catherine stared at her with a victorious smile. "I think your presence here is no longer necessary." With held-back tears and head held high, Sarah left the mansion. She had no idea that night would be just the beginning of a much bigger battle to come. The fluorescent lights of Vermont General Hospital's night shift cast harsh shadows across Sarah's tired face. 3 days had passed since the disastrous party in Boston, and she hadn't heard a word about her father's condition. "Mrs. Walker needs her medication," a young nurse reminded her. Sarah nodded, grateful for the distraction. As she measured the doses, her mind drifted to happier times, Sunday brunches with her father, before Catherine entered their lives, before everything changed. "You're an Anderson," her father's voice echoed from the past. "But more importantly, you have a gift for helping others." That memory brought both comfort and pain. At home, Sarah found Emily at the kitchen table, surrounded by colored papers and photos. "Mom, I need help with my family tree project," the 12-year-old said, holding up a half-finished diagram. Sarah's heart tightened. "What did you put so far?" "Well, there's us," Emily pointed to their names. "And Grandpa William." "But Mom, why is there such a big gap? Don't we have any other family?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed. Rebecca's name flashed on the screen. The first contact from any Anderson since the party. Sarah's hand trembled as she answered. "Sarah?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. I'm calling about Dad. The pause seemed eternal. "He's gone, Sarah. Last night, I thought you should hear it from family." The world stopped. Sarah gripped the kitchen counter, memories flooding her mind. Her father teaching her to ride a bike, attending her nursing school graduation, his proud smile when she saved her first patient. "The funeral?" Sarah managed to ask. "Catherine's handling everything." Rebecca's voice turned apologetic. She says you're not welcome. Emily watched her mother's face crumple. Mom, what's wrong? Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in her familiar scent. Your grandfather, he's gone to heaven, sweetie. But I never really got to know him, Emily's voice cracked. Why didn't he want to see us, Mom? Why didn't he love us? Oh, baby, he did love us. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair, fighting back tears. Sometimes grown-ups make complicated choices, but your grandfather loved you very much. Later that night, after Emily was asleep, Sarah found an old photo album hidden in her closet. There he was, William Anderson before Catherine, beaming with pride at his daughter's high school graduation. The next photo showed them together at the hospital where she interned. Her phone buzzed again, an official email this time. Regarding the last will and testament of William Anderson, your presence is required. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering her father's final whispered words at the party, still haunting her. What was he trying to tell her? A text from an unknown number lit up her screen. There's something you need to know about your father's death. Meet me tomorrow. Sarah stared at the message, her nursing instincts telling her something wasn't right about any of this. Her father's final days, Catherine's behavior, this mysterious text, pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Tomorrow would bring answers or more questions. But one thing was certain. Sarah owed it to her father, to Emily, and to herself to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The Anderson and Mitchell law firm towered over downtown Boston, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun. Sarah sat in her car, clutching her mother's old diary she'd found while packing for the trip. Something had made her bring it today. The elevator ride to the 30th floor felt endless. Each ding, marking another floor, matched her heartbeat's rising rhythm. When the doors opened, Catherine and Rebecca were already there, dressed in expensive black mourning attire that made Sarah's modest dress feel even more out of place. Well, look who dared to show up, Catherine's voice dripped with disdain. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. David Mitchell, the family's longtime lawyer, emerged from his office. His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes lingered sympathetically on Sarah for a moment too long. Please everyone, come in. He gestured toward the conference room. Let's begin. The oak table seemed to stretch for miles. Sarah sat alone on one side, while Catherine and Rebecca huddled together opposite her. Family photos lined the walls, painful reminders of happier times. Before we proceed, David began, I must ask, does anyone object to the reading of William Anderson's last will and testament? Catherine's smile turned predatory. Let's get this over with. David opened the document, his voice steady but somehow strained. I, William Anderson, being of sound mind. Sarah's world began to spin as the words washed over her. Everything, the entire estate, the company shares, even her mother's family heirlooms, all of it going to Catherine and Rebecca. Furthermore, David continued, I explicitly exclude my daughter Sarah Anderson from any inheritance. No. The word escaped Sarah's lips before she could stop it. Catherine's triumph radiated across the table. Well, what did you expect? After what you did? I never stole anything. Sarah's voice trembled with suppressed rage. You know that. The evidence suggests otherwise, Catherine smirked. Your own father believed it. That's all that matters now. Rebecca suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly. I need some air. She rushed out, leaving an awkward silence. One more thing, David interjected, pulling out another envelope. William left this letter for Sarah. Catherine's hand shot out. Any personal correspondence should go through me first. Actually, David's voice hardened slightly. As executor, I'm obligated to deliver it directly to Sarah. Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands. As she did, her mother's diary fell from her purse, papers scattering across the floor. While gathering them, a yellowed note fluttered out. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, the truth about Catherine must be told. Before she could grab it, Catherine snatched the paper, her face darkening as she read. Where did you get this? That's my mother's diary. Sarah reached for it, but Catherine pulled back. If you know what's good for you, Catherine's voice turned menacing. You'll drop this now. Otherwise, she left the threat hanging. David cleared his throat. This meeting is concluded. Sarah, might I have a word in private? As Sarah followed David to his office, she felt Catherine's eyes burning into her back. The diary had rattled her stepmother. But why? In his office, David spoke quietly. "Sarah, there's something you should know about your father's last days." A sudden commotion interrupted him. Rebecca had collapsed in the hallway. The pieces weren't fitting together, but Sarah sensed she was standing on the edge of a much bigger revelation. Her mother's diary, her father's letter, Rebecca's strange behavior, all of it connected somehow. But first, she had to decide: pursue the truth or heed Catherine's warning? The answer might cost her everything. Back in her Vermont apartment that night, Sarah spread her mother's diary across the kitchen table. Her hands trembled as she read by lamplight, Emily's soft breathing from the next room her only company. "William suspects something," one entry read. "Catherine's business meetings, the missing funds, the offshore accounts." Sarah's heart raced. More recent entries revealed a pattern of fraud and manipulation. Her father had been gathering evidence against Catherine for months before his death. Her phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. "I'm at Boston Memorial, emergency room. Please come." Within the hour, Sarah stood outside the hospital room where Rebecca lay pale and weak, an IV dripping steadily. The diagnosis hit Sarah like a physical blow, a rare blood disorder requiring experimental treatment. "The doctors say." Rebecca's voice cracked. "They say without the new treatment." "How much?" Sarah asked quietly. "Millions. Insurance won't cover experimental procedures." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Catherine, she says she can't access the company funds yet. Something about the will." A nurse interrupted them. "Miss Anderson, there's someone here to see you." David Mitchell stood in the hallway, looking grave. "I had to find you. Your father left something else." He handed her a USB drive. He was building a case. The company's been laundering money for years. Before Sarah could respond, her phone lit up with an email from Vermont General. "Due to serious allegations regarding your professional conduct." "It's starting," David warned. "Catherine's using her connections. She'll destroy your career unless..." "Unless what?" "Unless you destroy the evidence. All of it." Sarah's mind raced. The diary, the USB drive, her father's letter. Pieces of a puzzle that could bring down Catherine, but at what cost? Her phone buzzed again. A photo appeared. Emily at school, taken that day. The message below chilled her blood. "Choose wisely." "They're watching Emily?" Sarah's voice shook with rage. David nodded grimly. "Catherine has powerful friends. This goes beyond just your family." A commotion down the hall drew their attention. Catherine had arrived, her designer heels clicking ominously on the hospital floor. "Well, isn't this cozy?" She smiled coldly. "The disgraced nurse, the meddling lawyer, and my poor sick daughter." She turned to Sarah. "I'm warning you one last time. Walk away, or everything you care about." "Mrs. Anderson?" A doctor appeared. "Rebecca's test results, they're worse than we thought, without immediate treatment." Sarah looked between her sick sister and the evidence in her hands. The truth could destroy Catherine, but Rebecca would pay the price. And Emily, the threat to her daughter felt very real. 24 hours, Catherine whispered as she passed. "Then your daughter's safety is no longer guaranteed." David touched Sarah's arm. "Whatever you decide, be careful. Your father died trying to expose this." Sarah clutched the diary tighter. Had her father's death really been natural? And now with Rebecca's mysterious illness, Emily being watched. The truth was within her grasp, but it might cost her everything, and everyone she loved. Her pager beeped. An emergency ethics board meeting at Vermont General tomorrow morning. Catherine's threats were already in motion. Time was running out. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast harsh shadows across Sarah's face as she stared at the disciplinary notice in her hands. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she faced the hospital board. "These accusations are completely false," she stated firmly, meeting the cold stares of her colleagues. "I've never mishandled patient medications." Dr. Richards, once a trusted mentor, wouldn't even look her in the eye. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but with multiple witness statements, we have no choice but to suspend you pending investigation." Walking out of the hospital, Sarah felt the weight of Catherine's influence crushing her professional life. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emily's school principal. Her heart dropped as she read the message. 15 minutes later, Sarah burst into the school nurse's office to find Emily holding an ice pack to her swollen cheek, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, what happened?" Sarah rushed to her daughter's side. They said we're thieves," Emily sobbed, "that we tried to steal from Grandpa William." A group of kids had cornered her during recess, children of Catherine's country club friends. That evening, as Sarah tucked an exhausted Emily into bed, her phone rang. Rebecca's number flashed on the screen. "Sarah?" Her half-sister's voice was barely a whisper. "I need to see you. Please. It's important." They met in a small coffee shop downtown. Rebecca looked over her shoulder constantly, fear evident in her eyes. "Catherine, she's not who you think she is, the things she's capable of." Before Rebecca could finish, Sarah's phone lit up with an unknown number. The voice on the other end sent chills down her spine. "Such a shame about your suspension, Sarah, and poor little Emily. Children can be so cruel, but it's only the beginning unless you make the right choice." Sarah's grip tightened on her phone. "Catherine?" "Smart girl. So here's the deal, your reputation or your sister's life. Rebecca's experimental treatment was recently approved. Shame if something went wrong with the medication protocols." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "You wouldn't." "Try me. You have 24 hours to publicly confess to stealing from the hospital and withdraw any claims to your father's estate, or Rebecca won't survive the month." The line went dead. Sarah looked at Rebecca, who was fighting back tears. "She's monitoring my treatment personally," Rebecca whispered. "She'll do it, Sarah. She'll kill me and make it look like a complication." David Mitchell's words from earlier echoed in Sarah's mind. "Be careful, Sarah. Catherine's network runs deeper than you know. The hospital board, the police, she has people everywhere." As Sarah drove home that night, a black SUV followed closely. Too closely. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she took random turns, trying to lose them. When she finally pulled into her driveway, a single text message waited. "Time's ticking. Choose wisely." Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a video. Emily walking home from school filmed from a distance. The message was clear. No one was safe. Her father's last words suddenly made terrible sense, but was she strong enough to finish what he'd started? As Sarah watched Emily sleeping peacefully, she knew tomorrow would change everything. She just prayed they'd all survive it. Sarah's hands shook as she dialed 911 for the third time that morning. Emily's bed was empty, the covers still warm when she discovered her daughter missing. The backpack gone, lunchbox untouched on the kitchen counter. "Please, you don't understand," Sarah pleaded with the dispatcher. "She never leaves without saying goodbye, after the threats yesterday." "Ma'am, we can't file a missing persons report until 24 hours have passed," the dispatcher repeated mechanically. Boston Police Station's waiting room felt like a prison cell. Detective Martinez studied the surveillance photos of the black SUV, his expression grim. "Mrs. Anderson hired private security last week," he explained. "They're monitoring all family members for their protection." Sarah's phone buzzed, Catherine's name flashing on the screen. Her heart pounded as she answered. "Missing something?" Catherine's voice dripped with false concern. "Where is she?" Sarah's voice cracked. "She's just a child, Catherine. Children should be with their families. Real families, not disgraceful imposters trying to steal what isn't theirs." Across town, David Mitchell lay in his hospital bed, bandages covering the wounds from last night's accident. His voice was weak but urgent when Sarah visited. "They're moving faster than we thought," he wheezed. "The company merger, Catherine's selling to shell corporations, your father's legacy, everything he built. It'll all be gone by midnight." Sarah's phone chimed with a video message. Emily sat in an unfamiliar room, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy, I want to come home." The message cut off, replaced by text. "The diaries, all copies, midnight, or she stays with her real family permanently." Sarah stumbled into the hospital chapel, her legs giving out as she collapsed into a pew. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't know what to do. How do I choose between the truth and my baby girl?" Her phone lit up again, Rebecca's name this time. Sarah almost ignored it, but something made her answer. "Sarah?" Rebecca's voice was different, stronger despite her illness. "I know where they're keeping Emily." "How?" "Because I'm looking at her right now. Catherine brought her to the lake house. She doesn't know I followed them." Sarah, listen carefully. Catherine's not just trying to hide the fraud anymore. This merger, it's bigger. Money laundering, offshore accounts. Dad was gathering evidence for the FBI before he died. Sarah's mind raced. The diaries weren't just his memories, they're evidence. That's why Catherine's desperate to destroy them. Rebecca's voice dropped lower. I'm going to help you get Emily back. But Sarah, we have to be smart. Catherine has people everywhere. One wrong move. Why are you helping me? Sarah whispered. There was a long pause. Because you were right. Dad knew what Catherine was doing. His last words to me, he made me promise to protect you and Emily when the time came. I failed him once. I won't fail again. As Sarah pulled up to the lake house that evening, photographs of the evidence clutched in her hand. She saw Catherine's silhouette in the window. Her sister's daughter, her niece, pressed against the glass, small palms leaving foggy prints on the pane. Sarah checked her phone one last time. Rebecca's message glowed in the darkness. Ready when you are, be careful, and trust no one. The front door loomed before her, a final threshold between justice and survival. Behind it, her daughter waited. And so did Catherine, holding all the cards, or so she thought. The lake house's mahogany door creaked open before Sarah could knock. Catherine stood in the doorway, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. Behind her, Emily sat curled up on the couch, clutching her worn teddy bear. Mommy! Emily tried to run forward, but one of Catherine's security guards blocked her path. The diaries, Catherine demanded, extending her hand. Sarah reached into her bag, but Rebecca's voice suddenly rang out from the darkness. Don't. Catherine whirled around as Rebecca emerged from the shadows of the house. What are you doing here? Something I should have done years ago. Rebecca's voice shook, but her eyes were steel. I heard everything, Mother. The phone calls, the threats, the real reason Daddy died. Catherine's composure cracked for a split second. You're confused, sweetheart. The medication. I'm seeing clearly for the first time, Rebecca interrupted, moving to stand between Catherine and Emily. You're not protecting our family legacy. You're destroying everything Daddy built. Sarah watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding. This wasn't part of their plan. Rebecca was supposed to wait in the car as backup. You ungrateful little... Catherine lunged for Rebecca, but the sudden movement triggered a coughing fit in her daughter. Rebecca doubled over, blood speckling her sleeve. Security, get Emily out of here, Catherine barked. But when the guard moved toward Emily, Rebecca straightened up, pulling out her phone. Touch her, and the FBI gets everything. Every email, every transaction, every conversation about Daddy's accident. The color drained from Catherine's face. You're bluffing. Try me. Rebecca's fingers hovered over the screen. I've lived with your manipulation for years, watched you tear this family apart. But Sarah? She glanced at her sister. She's shown me more love in the past week than you have my entire life. Sarah took advantage of the distraction, rushing to Emily and pulling her close. Catherine's security guards looked uncertainly between the sisters, waiting for orders. I can cut off your treatment, Catherine threatened. You'll die without it. Rebecca laughed bitterly. I'm dying anyway, Mother, but I get to choose how I leave this world, as your puppet or as my father's daughter. The sound of police sirens pierced the night. David Mitchell had come through with his FBI contacts after all. It's over, Sarah said softly, holding Emily tight. Let it go, Catherine. Catherine's face contorted with rage. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the side table and hurled it at Rebecca. You treacherous little... Rebecca crumpled to the floor as the vase struck her temple. Blood trickled down her face, but she managed to hit send on her phone before losing consciousness. Rebecca, Sarah screamed, torn between rushing to her sister and protecting Emily. As FBI agents stormed the house, Catherine tried to flee but was quickly apprehended. Sarah held Emily with one arm while cradling Rebecca's head with the other, whispering desperately, "Stay with me, sis. Please stay with me." Rebecca's eyes fluttered open briefly. Did you know? She whispered. I always wanted a sister like you. The paramedics rushed in as Rebecca's eyes closed again. Sarah watched them load her sister into the ambulance, Emily clutching her hand tightly. Is Aunt Rebecca going to be okay? Emily asked tearfully. Sarah stared at the ambulance's retreating lights, praying she hadn't just traded one sister's life for another's freedom. I don't know, baby, but she finally chose her real family. The night was far from over, but for the first time, the sisters were truly united, even if it might have come at a terrible cost. The hospital waiting room clock ticked relentlessly as Sarah stared at the ICU restricted access sign. 48 hours had passed since Rebecca's sacrifice at the lake house, and her sister's condition was deteriorating rapidly. "Ms. Anderson?" A nurse approached, her expression grave. "Your sister's asking for you." Rebecca lay pale against the stark white sheets, machines beeping steadily around her. The injury from Catherine's attack had triggered a severe relapse of her condition. "Hey sis," Sarah whispered, taking Rebecca's hand. Did they get the evidence to the FBI in time?" Rebecca's voice was barely audible. Before Sarah could answer, her phone buzzed with breaking news. Anderson Pharmaceuticals CEO Catherine Anderson posts bail, claims evidence tampering. Sarah's heart sank as she read further. Somehow, Catherine's influence had reached even into the FBI investigation. Key evidence had been misplaced. Witnesses were recanting their statements, and David Mitchell, Sarah? David's law partner, Michael Chen, stood in the doorway, his face ashen. "There's been an accident. David's car, the brakes failed on his way to meet the federal prosecutor. The room seemed to spin. Is he? Critical condition. But Sarah, there's more. Before the crash, he called me. The backup copies of your father's evidence, the ones we stored in the offshore account, someone got to them. Everything's gone." Rebecca's grip on Sarah's hand tightened weakly. Check Daddy's study. The painting. But Sarah's phone rang again. The hospital board chairman's name flashed on the screen. In less than 5 minutes, her entire medical career was demolished as Catherine's final revenge played out. "Your nursing license has been permanently revoked," he stated coldly. "The evidence of patient negligence is overwhelming." That evening, Sarah sat in her father's study, surrounded by the ruins of her life. Her career destroyed, David fighting for his life, Rebecca failing, and now Catherine's PR machine was painting her as a mentally unstable gold digger on every national news outlet. Emily slept fitfully on the study's leather couch, still traumatized from her kidnapping. Sarah gently stroked her daughter's hair, tears falling freely. "I'm so sorry, Daddy," she whispered to the empty room. I tried so hard." Her eyes drifted to the painting Rebecca had mentioned, her father's favorite, a stormy seascape that had hung in his study for decades. Something about the way the light hit the frame. Sarah stood slowly, hope flickering faintly. She remembered summer afternoons watching her father straighten that painting, always so particular about its position. The same painting he'd stared at during their last conversation, trying to tell her something. Her fingers trembled as they traced the frame's edge. There, a slight catch, almost invisible. The painting swung away from the wall, revealing a small safe she'd never known existed. And taped to the safe's door was an envelope, her name written in her father's shaky hand. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then everything I feared has come to pass. But you're stronger than you know, sweetheart. And sometimes we need to lose everything to see what was there all along. The combination is the date you first helped me save a life. All my love, Dad." Sarah's mind raced back to that spring morning, age 16, when she'd helped her father stabilize a heart attack patient in his home office. The day she'd discovered her calling to heal others. As she reached for the safe's dial, her father's last message finally became clear. She wasn't just fighting for an inheritance or justice anymore. She was fighting for his legacy. The true one. And she was her father's daughter, through and through. Sarah's hands shook as she entered the combination, 0415-98. The safe door swung open with a soft click, revealing a small USB drive and a thick manila envelope, her father's final insurance policy against Catherine's corruption. Dawn was breaking when Michael Chen arrived at the safe house, his laptop ready. As they reviewed William Anderson's hidden files, their eyes widened. "This is beyond anything we imagined," Michael whispered. "Shell companies, offshore accounts. Catherine wasn't just stealing from the company. She was using Anderson Pharmaceuticals to launder money for drug cartels. And the experimental treatments?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Unauthorized trials. They were using desperate patients as guinea pigs." Michael looked up grimly, including Rebecca. Sarah's phone buzzed. David Mitchell was awake. At the hospital, he listened intently from his bed as they explained their discovery. "We need to move fast," David said, wincing through his pain. "Catherine's scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. She's planning to dissolve the company entirely." "How much time do we have?" Sarah asked. "The meeting's at 9. Once those papers are signed, everything disappears." David grabbed Sarah's hand. "Your father knew this day would come. That's why he put you on the board before he died." Sarah blinked. "What?" But Catherine said, "She lied. Check the USB. Your appointment was his last official act as CEO." David smiled weakly. "You have the right to call an emergency session. One last chance to expose everything." Back at the safe house, Sarah reviewed her father's final letter while Emily slept nearby. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this now, you understand what must be done. The company I built was meant to heal people, not destroy lives. I trust you to make it right. Remember what I taught you. The strongest hearts are those that break but keep beating. All my love, Dad." A soft knock interrupted her tears. Rebecca stood in the doorway, pale but determined, supported by her nurse. "I'm testifying tomorrow," she announced before Sarah could protest. "The doctors say?" She took a shaky breath. "I don't have much time left. Let me make it count." Sarah hugged her sister gently. "We can't risk your health." "My health?" Rebecca gave a bitter laugh. "Catherine's treatments are killing me anyway. At least this way, my death means something." Through the night, they worked with Michael and David's team, preparing for the confrontation ahead. More allies emerged, company whistleblowers, former patients, even Catherine's own assistant all ready to testify. As sunrise painted the Boston skyline, Sarah stood at her father's study window, Emily's small hand in hers. "Are you scared, Mommy?" Sarah thought of her father's courage, Rebecca's sacrifice, all the lives destroyed by Catherine's greed. "Not anymore, sweetheart. Sometimes love gives us the strength we need to fight." Her phone chimed. A message from Michael. "FBI's on board. Teams in position." Sarah kissed Emily's forehead and straightened her jacket. In a few hours, she would walk into Anderson Pharmaceuticals not as the disgraced nurse, but as her father's true heir. "Ready?" Rebecca asked from the doorway, dressed for battle despite her weakness. Sarah nodded, feeling her father's presence around them. "Catherine thinks she's won because she took everything from us." "But she forgot one thing," Rebecca smiled. "We're Andersons," Sarah finished. "And Andersons don't break. We heal." Together, the sisters headed for the door, their father's legacy secure in Sarah's briefcase and their hearts. The final battle awaited. And this time, they were ready. The Anderson Pharmaceuticals tower gleamed in the morning sun as Sarah and Rebecca stepped out of the car. Security guards watched them closely, hands on their earpieces. News vans lined the street, reporters clamoring as the sisters approached. "Ms. Anderson, is it true you're contesting Catherine Anderson's leadership?" "Rebecca, why are you supporting your sister's claims?" Sarah squeezed Rebecca's hand as they entered the lobby. Her father's portrait hung prominently, his kind eyes seeming to follow them to the elevator. "Ninth floor boardroom," Michael texted. "Catherine's already here with her lawyers. FBI teams in position." The elevator doors opened to reveal Catherine holding court among the board members, her perfectly manicured hands gesturing as she spoke. "Simply protecting our company's interests." She froze mid-sentence at their entrance. "What is the meaning of this?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. "As a board member appointed by William Anderson, I'm calling this meeting to order." Catherine's laugh was razor-sharp. "You're delusional. Security." "I wouldn't." Michael emerged from the corner, holding up a document. "Sarah's appointment was legally filed. Try to remove her, and this becomes corporate obstruction." Catherine's mask slipped for a moment before she recovered, smoothly taking her seat. "Fine. Let's hear what my dear stepdaughter has to say." Sarah opened her briefcase, laying out her father's evidence. 10 years ago, Anderson Pharmaceuticals began conducting unauthorized drug trials. As Sarah presented the damning evidence, Catherine's composure cracked. Her eyes darted to the exits where FBI agents now stood guard. "These allegations are ridiculous," Catherine sputtered. "The board knows my reputation." "Your reputation?" Rebecca's voice cut through the room like steel. She stood shakily, pulling up her sleeve to reveal track marks. "Tell them about the experimental treatments, Mother. Tell them how many patients died while you laundered cartel money." The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Catherine's lawyer leaned over, whispering urgently in her ear. "You ungrateful little witch," Catherine hissed at Rebecca. "I gave you everything. You gave me poison." Rebecca's voice broke. "You killed my father and tried to kill me too." Catherine lunged for her daughter, but FBI agents moved swiftly. "Catherine Anderson, you're under arrest." "You can't do this to me," Catherine shrieked as they cuffed her. "I built this company." "No," Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "Our father built this company to help people. You tried to destroy it." As Catherine was led away, still screaming threats, Rebecca swayed dangerously. Sarah caught her sister as she collapsed. "Rebecca, stay with me." "I'm okay," Rebecca whispered, though her skin was gray. "Just tired." "Did we do it? Did we make it right?" Sarah held her sister, tears flowing freely. "Yes, we did it. Dad would be so proud of you." The board members approached, led by the senior director. "Miss Anderson, in light of these revelations, we need to discuss the company's future leadership." But Sarah's focus was on Rebecca, who had slipped into unconsciousness. As paramedics rushed in, Sarah felt the weight of her father's legacy pressing down. She had won the battle for justice, but at what cost? And somehow, she knew the day's revelations were far from over. The evidence in her briefcase still held one final secret, one that would change everything again. The beeping of hospital monitors filled the tense silence as Sarah sat beside Rebecca's bed, reviewing her father's final files. Emily had fallen asleep in the corner chair, exhausted from the day's events. Through the window, news helicopters circled the hospital, covering Catherine's arrest and the scandal rocking Boston's medical community. Sarah's hand trembled as she opened the last encrypted folder on the USB drive. What she found made her blood run cold. "Rebecca," she whispered, shaking her sister gently, "you need to see this." Rebecca's eyes fluttered open. The doctors had stabilized her condition, but the damage from Catherine's experimental treatments was severe. "What is it?" "Dad didn't die from his heart condition." Sarah turned the laptop so Rebecca could see. Catherine had been slowly poisoning him for months. She altered his medication. Rebecca's monitors spiked as she processed the information. "The same way she's been poisoning me." A knock at the door interrupted them. David Mitchell entered, still moving gingerly from his injuries, but his eyes bright with purpose. "The FBI found Catherine's private files," he announced. "She's willing to make a deal." "No deals," Rebecca's voice was firm despite her weakness. "She needs to pay for everything." As if summoned by their conversation, Catherine appeared in the doorway, flanked by FBI agents. Despite the handcuffs, she maintained her aristocratic pose. "My lawyer thinks I should confess," she said coldly. "Trade information about my business partners for leniency." Sarah stood protectively between Catherine and Rebecca. "You're not bargaining your way out of this." "Aren't I?" Catherine's smile was serpentine. "You haven't even asked the most important question, Sarah. Why did your father really change his will at the last minute?" "Because you forced him," Sarah shot back. "No." Catherine's eyes glittered. "Because he found out what your mother did before she died, the real reason she left." The room seemed to tilt. "What are you talking about?" "Show them," Catherine commanded one of her lawyers, who produced a weathered envelope. "Sis, your precious mother was embezzling from the company long before I arrived. William discovered it just before he died." "You're lying," Sarah whispered, but Catherine's triumphant expression didn't waver. "Am I?" "Read the document, Sarah. Your mother was stealing to fund her gambling addiction. The only reason William didn't press charges was to protect you." Rebecca suddenly grabbed Sarah's hand. "Wait, the dates on Dad's medication changes. They started right after he found these papers." Sarah's mind raced. "He was protecting me, and you were using that to poison him." "He became a liability," Catherine shrugged. "Just like your mother would have been if cancer hadn't done my job for me." The confession slipped out so casually, but the FBI agents immediately moved forward. "Mrs. Anderson, you have the right to remain silent. You really should have taken the deal," David said quietly as Catherine was led away, her face contorted with the realization of her mistake. Sarah sank into her chair, the weight of revelations crushing her. Rebecca squeezed her hand weakly. "She's trying to poison your memories, too." Rebecca whispered, "Don't let her." Sarah looked at the documents, then at Emily sleeping peacefully. innocent of all these dark truths. Mom made mistakes, Sarah said finally, but Dad forgave her. He protected her memory because that's what love does. It protects. It forgives. Like you protected me, Rebecca smiled faintly. Sarah hugged her sister carefully, mindful of the IV lines. Outside, the sun was setting on a day that had changed everything. The truth about both their mothers had come to light, painful and complicated. But as Sarah held Rebecca's hand, she realized that sometimes the most important family isn't the one you're born into. It's the one you choose to fight for. 1 year later, spring sunshine streamed through the windows of the newly constructed William Anderson Memorial Hospital. Sarah stood at the podium, her father's portrait smiling down at her as she addressed the gathered crowd. Today, we honor not just a building, but a promise, she began, her voice strong and clear. A promise my father made to help those in need, regardless of their ability to pay. In the front row, Emily beamed proudly, holding Rebecca's hand. After months of proper treatment, Rebecca was finally showing signs of recovery. Her hair was growing back, and color had returned to her cheeks. The Anderson Foundation's free clinic program will ensure that no family has to choose between medication and meals, Sarah continued. No mother has to watch her child suffer because she can't afford treatment. David Mitchell, fully recovered from his accident, nodded approvingly from his seat on the board. The company's transformation under Sarah's leadership had exceeded everyone's expectations. After the ceremony, Sarah found Rebecca in their father's old office, now converted into a pediatric consultation room. The walls were bright with children's artwork, but William's favorite seascape still hung in its place of honor. Dad would love this, Rebecca said softly, touching the painting's frame. Using Catherine's illegal profits to fund patient care, it's perfect justice. Sarah smiled, remembering Catherine's face at the sentencing. No deals, no compromises. She would spend the rest of her life in prison, her empire transformed into a force for healing. I have something for you, Sarah said, pulling out an envelope. Inside was a legal document. Rebecca's official adoption of her mother's married name. You're an Anderson now, in name and spirit. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. Sarah, Family is more than blood, Sarah hugged her sister. You taught me that. Emily burst into the office, waving a paper excitedly. Mom, Aunt Rebecca, look what I made in art class. It was a family tree, but not the traditional kind. Emily had drawn a great oak tree, its branches connecting everyone who had helped them during their darkest days. David, Michael, the hospital staff who had protected them, even their father's spirit watching from above. It's perfect, sweetheart, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Later that evening, as they walked through the hospital's healing garden, another of William's dreams brought to life, Emily asked the question she'd been holding in all day. Do you think Grandpa would be proud of us? Sarah looked at her daughter, then at Rebecca, remembering everything they'd overcome together. He once told me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the hearts we heal. Rebecca smiled, squeezing Emily's hand. Then I'd say we're the richest family in Boston. As the sun set behind the hospital that bore her father's name, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. The Anderson legacy had been transformed, just like their family. What Catherine had meant for evil had become a source of healing for countless others. A young mother approached them, tears in her eyes. Miss Anderson, I just wanted to thank you. My daughter's treatment. I never could have afforded it before. Sarah watched the woman's little girl playing nearby, her hospital bracelet catching the evening light. This was her father's true legacy. Not the fortune Catherine had tried to steal, but the simple power of compassion. Sometimes, Sarah said softly, forgiveness opens doors that money never could. In the growing darkness, the hospital's lights glowed warmly, a beacon of hope for all who needed healing. Inside its walls, a new generation of Andersons would continue the work that William had begun, guided by love rather than profit. And in the end, that was the greatest inheritance of all. Previous content remains the same, then continues. Days at the William Anderson Memorial Hospital settled into a rhythm that would have made her father proud. Sarah's mornings began in the free clinic, where she personally oversaw the most critical cases. Her nursing license had been reinstated with honors after Catherine's manipulation came to light, but she chose to split her time between patient care and hospital administration. "Miss Anderson?" A timid voice called one morning. Sarah turned to find Maria, one of the clinic's regular patients. The young mother's eyes were bright with tears. "The new treatment, my son's cancer is in remission." Sarah hugged the crying woman, remembering her own mother's battle with cancer. Some victories meant more than others. In her father's old office, now her own, Sarah kept a wall of letters. Each one told a story of lives changed, families saved, hope restored. Emily called it the Grandpa Wall, because as she said, this is what he really wanted his money to do. Right, Mom? Rebecca's recovery had become a symbol of hope for other patients in experimental treatment programs. She now headed the hospital's patient advocacy department, ensuring that every person who walked through their doors received ethical, transparent care. You should have seen the board's faces. Rebecca laughed during their weekly sister lunch. "When I proposed opening our research data to other hospitals, I thought old Mr. Peterson would have a heart attack." Dad always said medical breakthroughs should serve humanity, not stockholders, Sarah replied, remembering his passionate speeches about healthcare ethics. The transformation hadn't been easy. Many of Catherine's old allies had fought them every step of the way. But David Mitchell's legal expertise, combined with the FBI's ongoing investigation, had cleaned house thoroughly. The Anderson Foundation now stood as a model of corporate responsibility. Emily thrived in this new reality. Her school projects often focused on medical ethics and patient care, inspired by her family's journey. She spent afternoons doing homework in the pediatric ward, reading to young patients, and sharing her own story of how love conquered greed. "Mom," she asked one evening, "do you ever miss the old mansion? All those fancy parties and stuff?" Sarah looked around their modest but comfortable home, filled with photos of their real family: Rebecca recovering in the hospital, David's retirement party, Michael's wedding where Emily had been flower girl, and countless moments of simple joy. "Not for a second, sweetheart. We have something Catherine never understood: people who love us for who we are, not what we own." The Anderson Foundation's annual charity gala was transformed from Catherine's ostentatious displays into a genuine celebration of healing. Instead of society photographers, the walls featured patient success stories. Where crystal champagne flutes once sparkled, children from the oncology ward displayed their artwork. "Your father would be so proud," David said, watching Sarah interact with donors and patients alike. "You've turned his dream into something even greater." Sometimes late at night, Sarah would walk the hospital corridors, remembering her journey. From the nurse Catherine had humiliated to the leader who transformed her father's legacy. Every room held stories of healing, not just physical, but emotional too. The pediatric wing became Rebecca's special project. She channeled her own recovery experience into creating spaces where sick children could find joy alongside treatment. The walls bloomed with murals, and therapy dogs became regular visitors. "Aunt Rebecca," Emily observed one day, "you smile a lot more now." Rebecca hugged her niece. "That's because I finally understand what true wealth is. It's not in our bank accounts, it's in moments like these." The William Anderson Memorial Garden became a sanctuary for patients and families. Sarah had incorporated her mother's favorite flowers, creating a space of beauty and peace. Here among the blooms, healing took many forms. Catherine's trial had made national headlines, exposing corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. But the Anderson Foundation's reformation made even bigger waves. Other companies began following their model of ethical research and accessible care. "You've started a movement," Michael told Sarah during a board meeting. "Healthcare facilities across the country are adopting our transparency protocols." Sarah kept her father's photo on her desk, along with the painting that had hidden his final gift. Every morning, she touched the frame gently, remembering his words about the strongest hearts being those that break but keep beating. The hospital's success allowed them to expand their mission. Satellite clinics opened in underserved areas, each one carrying forward William Anderson's vision of healthcare as a right, not a privilege. Emily's art therapy program for young patients blossomed into a full-fledged healing arts initiative. Because sometimes, she explained with wisdom beyond her years. People need their hearts fixed as much as their bodies. Rebecca's Research Oversight Committee became a national model for ethical medical trials. She testified before Congress about the importance of patient protection, her own story serving as a powerful testament to the need for reform. "We're not just healing individuals," she told Sarah after her testimony. "We're healing the system itself." The Anderson sisters' story became legend in Boston medical circles, not for the scandal, but for the redemption that followed. They proved that the greatest legacy isn't built on money or power, but on compassion and integrity. As Sarah watched the sun set behind the hospital one evening, Emily and Rebecca by her side, she felt her father's presence strongly. This was his true victory, not the defeat of Catherine's greed, but the triumph of his values living on through his daughters. "You know what, Mom?" Emily said softly. "I think Grandpa knew this would happen. That's why he left those clues for you to find." Sarah smiled, remembering the path that led them here. "He taught me that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about love, forgiveness, and the courage to stand up for what's right." Together, they had transformed a story of betrayal into one of hope. The Anderson name now stood for something greater than wealth. It stood for healing, in every sense of the word. And in the quiet moments when Sarah walked the hospital halls at night, she could almost hear her father whispering, "Well done, my girls. Well done." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. How has forgiveness changed your life? Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us what truly matters in life. Remember, sometimes the greatest healing comes not from medicine, but from the courage to love again. In the end, it's not the wealth we accumulate, but the lives we touch that write our true legacy.